Welcome, dear listeners, to another episode of the Developer Relations Activity Patterns podcast, the world's worst titled podcast. In this session, we're actually going to drop somewhat into the middle of a raging debate between the four of us over the forums pattern, largely due, as I'm sure many people are aware, that there's been kind of a decline in activity on Stack Overflow and a rise in activity around coding agents. And we four were kind of divided on whether or not the forums pattern still tracks. Just to kick it all off, I still think it does. I still think that forums are a useful and necessary way for developers to communicate with each other. Because remember, that's part of it, right? The company can always communicate with the community easily. You've got a blog, you've got official company announcements, press releases. There's lots of ways for that to flow out. Getting developer feedback, however, well, okay, we could talk about social media responses and so forth, but really the developers talking to each other, that's always been a key part of a whole forums, and keep in mind, as we talk about forums, we're talking about a variety of different things, Stack Overflow being one, you host one yourself, you use Reddit, there's a lot of different ways that forums can manifest themselves. So I'm team forum. I think they're going to stick around, but now you guys, tell me why I'm wrong, and I'll tell you why you're wrong for thinking I'm wrong.
My first idea, are you which side are you on, Woody?
I'm kind of in the middle. I can tell you how we used them at JetBrains. So at JetBrains they had forums, but they were a mix of forums and bug reporting and task tracking for the engineering teams to be transparent with end users. So they had their own special. I mean, they built it. They supported it, but you could come in and put stuff down or give feedback, and then they could create a new task based on that. So that's how they did it at JetBrains. But see, I remember in college and shortly after college, Usenet was the huge thing. And if anyone remembers Chrome the Moon, there was a channel called Chrome.the.moon. Or there was other ones like Concrete, the Earth, and there were weird ones that people would just jump into and talk about random stuff. But
yeah, Usenet's like the original forum software, and if you've got this in your beard or in your hair, you might remember Usenet, but pretty much only us diehards really do anymore.
Yeah.
I assume they're still running. Do you know if they're still running?
I don't know if there's Usenet. I mean, there's got to be some Usenet servers.
Yeah.
Because they were kind of the first distributed application on the internet.
Well, I mean, depending on how you categorize that. I mean, we've had email and FTP and so forth, before.
Well, I'm talking about like instances. There were like distributed instances across different servers. And
different people
could
host forums, but I think, it was definitely, at least as far as I'm aware of, it was the first, what I would call like a multi-user, right? Yeah. Where multiple people, email was point to point, right? Even if I was emailing 4 different people, it was a point to point communication with each one that just happened to include all those other points. But this was a broadcast, right? Yeah. I posted something on Usenet, and anybody who was subscribed to that forum would see that post, right? And potentially long after I made the post, depending on what the retention policies were. Yeah. So this is really the first forum, like multi-user broadcast, technology of the day.
I don't remember many companies using it though. So
Mm-mm.
I'm trying to remember what the first forum I ever saw for like a company.
Wasn't it PHPBB? Wasn't that kind of the first
Yeah,
package and it
PHPBB.
became kind of ubiquitous, right? Like everyone, it was like
Yeah,
a standard setup. You set up a website and you set up your own instance of PHPBB
you're
and
right.
Yeah,
made it
probably.
like your central gathering point.
Or if you did WordPress, you could do a PHP BB right next to it.
Oh, okay.
And I remember doing WordPress with, and then you could then jump off the WordPress and link over to your bulletin board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a pretty common setup for most companies, regardless of implementation, because there were a bunch of clones of PHPBB that came out. Like the Java folks, of course, had to produce one, and I think the .NET
and
folks
Rails
flirted
and
with one. I don't
Rails
know if it
did
ever took
Yeah.
off,
theirs.
Yep.
right?
So yep.
But
So
you
really,
started
should we
Slack.
have named it? So the reason why I have a feeling about this forums chapter, if you look at the term forum, those aren't really around anymore. You don't go to a site and say, go to our forums, because that terminology isn't used anymore. But I remember when we made this section of the book, we had this discussion, and forums seem like the most general way of describing a central gathering place for everyone to come and post and have it be a publicly broadcasted thing that we could all share answers and questions and discussions, and which is, in general, a forum. But it sounds like that PHPBB, Usenet, those were more bulletin boards, and then those evolved into forums.
Yeah.
And then forums,
Yeah.
I think now have evolved more into the discussion platforms like Slack, Discord, Reddit. I think those are the sections that are the areas where people are gathering, but it's still the same, or at least the similar purpose. And so whether it's a
I'm going to take
forum,
issue with Slack in that category, because there's a more real-time component to Slack than there was to Usenet, right? Usenet was more, in terms of chronological expectations, right? Temporal expectations. I put something on Usenet and I'm not sitting there immediately waiting for a reply. More people, it seems, use Slack as kind of an instant communication thing. If I need you, I Slack you, and you're expected to respond fairly quickly. That didn't happen with Usenet or with PHPBB or with Reddit. And I think Reddit is possibly really I think it's carrying the poster, or it's carrying the flag for forums, because I'll post something to Reddit and I'm not hovering waiting for a response the way I do with Slack or Teams or something like that. Slack and Teams strike me as more kind of the instant communication platforms, kind of like what we used to use like Microsoft Messenger for, or Yahoo Chat, or any of those things. And those, remember, those were contemporaries to the PHP bulletin boards.
Yep.
Does that make
I would
sense?
say that discoverability of like, hey, I want to go and see what new things are being discussed and everything. I think those topics are so much easier on a forum to digest, to kind of sift through and scan, rather than a tool like Slack or Discord, because it's just like you really can't. There's no way to like keep up on a Slack channel or Discord community, because it's all dumped into one channel.
Threaded, right?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
It's not threaded, right?
But it seems, and maybe my view's slanted because my last few companies I've worked for have all been relatively early, right? Startup-y type companies. Maybe it's those startup companies that are leaning towards the Slacks and the Discords, because that's where they're getting their feedback back from the community. This is your chance to talk to the company, is going to their Slack workspace, going to their Discord. And so I think that's where, in my mind, forums are kind of shifting, at least for those size companies. But you're right. It's trying to find an answer in any of those platforms is maddening.
That was one of the big advantages to, especially because as you accumulated more of this stuff, right? Every one of these forum software packages I ever saw generally ended up evolving the ability to pin conversations, right? Because that was the way a lot of them phrased this: is, I've posted something and now we've started a threaded conversation, so people would reply to that and reply to other people within that thread and so forth. But you could pin some of them where you could put things like administrative details. This is our code of conduct. Here's where you go to report a bug. Here are the kinds of posts that we're looking for in this forum. Here are links to some of the other forums if you want to create a forum, if you want to become a moderator, if the thing got really, really big. That kind of discoverability became important because, in some cases, I can Google a thing, and wiring the forums up so that they can be seen by search engines becomes an important aspect of this, which raises another question around all the coding agents, right?
I was going to say, don't forget agents, right?
Well, that's part of the thing is we're watching the decline of Stack Overflow because everybody's using agents, but you kind of wonder if we're not feeding Stack Overflow with data anymore. What are the agents going to harvest? And will that potentially see a rise in forums as people start posting their comments and thoughts and so forth, as companies kind of figure out the legalities of, if I post something to that third-party forum, is it legal for my agent to harvest that? MCPs, this is all still virgin territory. We're still figuring all that out, but I think there might be a rise in forums that could appear.
Well, the rumblings that I've been hearing is that we for years now we've had search engine optimization, so SEO, where we're optimizing our websites for searching. Now there's the AI agent optimization strategies, and from what I've heard from different sources is that Reddit has become the primary target for agents for gathering information. It has become the most trusted source, if you will, like the one with the most juice that agents are going to build their LLMs on. And so I think companies are looking at strategies for how do we promote more engagement in Reddit, because that's where the agents are going to be picking up these discussions and, are going to prefer our platform over others because we have more juice in Reddit.
Which speaks well to Reddit moderation.
Right.
Because that's usually the soft spot for most forums. Right, you open things up to public commentary, and the next thing you know, people are debating, World Cup teams and taking things entirely, or worse, right? And so if you have to, this is one of the dangers of a company hosting their own forums, is how do we moderate this and keep things focused and on task without losing some of the energy and vitality that's necessary to prop them up in the first place? Because if people aren't excited to write stuff, at the end of the day, we're asking people to take time out of their lives to write posts and so forth, for which they're not compensated anyway, except maybe in social recognition or knowledge.
Gamification, yeah.
Yeah.
That whole gamification.
Right. Yeah. So, now kudos to Reddit for figuring out how to be that trusted source. Right, because that's kind of a big deal, and that's a fairly narrow line to walk. That has been the death knell of many forums, or, although we didn't really talk about this much in the book, I don't think, mailing lists. Remember when those were kind of the forums of the day, right? You just send an email off to an email address, and it got captured, and it got put into those forums. They're still around. Developmentor had a public list where everybody could subscribe and discuss, and then we said, all right, we're going to break these out into 6 or 7 different topics, and they all died. It literally was the death of that mailing list. You lost a critical mass when you did that. And I've watched communities do exactly that. They fragment too soon as opposed to just letting everybody mingle in the same common room.
Yeah. That seems to be a common pattern no matter what the platform. Because I've seen like Slack communities who like, oh, well, we need to create, more channels to like for people to discuss these things. And then those channels just die. They don't, there's not enough people who are like, oh, well, I want to talk about just this one topic, or, a general discussion thread is, better, I guess.
Yeah. I think it's weird because I would love for somebody to do some kind of a sociological study as to like how many people in the community and how many posts per day are the point at which it's optimal to do that break. Because if you have too many topics, people walk away because it's too chaotic, too disjoint, I can't follow anything. But if you don't have enough, then you can't break things out and the community dies. I wonder what the sweet spot there is. Anyway, go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
So I worked at Asana for a while, and that's, I guess, in my experience, was one of the more active forums, which I was surprised. I guess there's just a culture that sometimes happens with certain products or whatever, where forums are, end up thriving more than others. And I think maybe it has something to do with the moderators and people who are active in those forums. I think, what really fuels forums is engagement. When you have someone who is answering the questions and, providing feedback and, doing all the things, then, it kind of is like a healthy, indicator that, hey, I'm out here. I see that several people have posted and several, all of them have been replied to. Like that gives me confidence that, if I post a question, somebody's going to answer. So at Asana, we had several people in the developer community who were like ambassadors. We got this other chapter in our book about ambassadors who really just, I don't know, for personal reasons, decided I feel good about participating in the forums and engaging with the rest of the developer community, and so they did an excellent job of balancing, taking on some of the work of answering questions, pointing people to documentation, all those kinds of things, and so as an Asana employees, like, you want to encourage that. You want to provide, resources and things. So one of the things that we did was we combined Slack with our forums. We gave those ambassadors a back channel that they could, come to us more, what do you call it? Like in real time, and say, hey, here's a question out on the forums. I don't really know the answer to this, or, it's more complicated than I can explain, or whatever the case may be. And so we could either provide that information to them in Slack, or that was a signal like, okay, well, one of us on the DevRel team will answer that question and, jump over there and do it. And it was, it provided them a channel to like ask for our roadmap kind of stuff, and we could give them like insider information. It was a really good setup.
Yeah. Well, and plus it makes the ambassadors a desirable thing for, to become for other people in the community, because nothing makes something desirable more than unattainability, right? What? You've got a secret channel that nobody else knows about? Ooh, yeah. I want it. I want to become an ambassador. How do I become an ambassador?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. No, I think even whether you have an official ambassador program or not, that is what we're aiming for as developer relations, is we're trying to find that community that's willing to engage with the community. Because once you start creating resources where the community engages with each other, and you just facilitated it, but you're just on the sidelines, you won. Yeah. Right? Like that's it. That's critical mass of what you want as a developer advocate.
ton of pressure off
Huge.
the DevRel team too.
Yeah.
Right, because now it's a self-sustaining engine, and you don't have to put as much energy pushing as much as just guiding, right? Keeping it from going off the rails, a little bit, and knowing how much how much room you want to give it before it's considered off the rails and all that. That's definitely more art than science. But if you can get to a point where I didn't have to post today, right? If I'm the developer advocate, I don't have to post, and we still hit our metric targets of number of posts and number of users and whatnot, and I didn't have to do anything. Oh, that's now that's a self-sustaining engine, right? That's joyous. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I was going to say, David brought up a good point with Slack and having some public channels.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing you can also do is allow your engineering team to come in to those channels, because they're users on Slack. They can come into the public kind of channels and discuss and take on some questions, because you as a developer advocate may not, someone may bring a question or have a bug that you don't know anything about. And so you can say, hey, I would like this engineer to come in and look at this question. And usually they'll jump in, answer it, then they'll hightail it out of that channel, because they're already on dozens of channels internal.
Well, the other thing you have to be careful about with that, because I watched this happen at a company I was at long time ago. They were very, very protective of their engineers, because there was a time when the engineers they gave the engineers emails out to customers. Right? If you have any questions, just go ahead and email us. Well, all of a sudden that became a back channel for feature requests and bug reports. And more importantly, there was an expectation of technical support that came with that, right? And so you really have to start being careful about, okay, so for example, I would advocate that you want to have, if you use Slack internally for communication, you may want to have a separate instance for external communication, just so that they don't cross feed into each other. Because if I can get a hold of an actual engineer who seems sympathetic to my problem, I'm going to be hammering that contact as often as I can, particularly if I'm under pressure from my management to get this thing fixed or to get that feature in so that we don't have to build it ourselves.
Yeah. I don't remember there being engineers in this particular case with the Slack channels, but there were PMs.
Yeah.
And I think that was good visibility for them that they could see, these are the kind of things that are popping up and, questions that are being asked. Even if they weren't, answering any of those questions, they could at least, get a sense of what was going on without a developer advocate continuing to have to spoon feed them, additional information.
And I've experienced both, where the engineers and PMs have gotten involved in the discussion themselves. I've also had it at some companies where the engineer wanted to be helpful, but they didn't want to be the name that was in the conversation. So they would tell me, they'd be like, hey, I if you can help me, if you can post this, so it's coming from you, so they know it's not so they don't have my contact information.
Right.
Yeah. And as a developer relations person, right. That's what we're there for. We're there to be the relation between developers and engineering. So that was a great fit.
When I worked at Active Campaign, we actually had that as part of our workflow, that if I needed to escalate an issue, part of it was like, well, we were using Zendesk, and, Zendesk licenses are not cheap. And so not everybody has access to Zendesk. And so if I needed to escalate something to an engineer, the engineer would write the response as if I were giving the response and give that to me. That was just part of the contract that we had with, here's how we how we respond to these things. And so then I would take what their response, clean it up a little bit, whatever needed to be done, and then post it. And it made my job easier because, it was already written, as if it was in my, coming from me.
So on that thought, gentlemen, last question. Do we think that the consuming public should know about that proxying situation? Are we doing them a disservice by, in your case, Scott, posting that answer as if it were yours when in fact it came from one of the engineers? Or do you say, hey, I talked with one of our engineers and their response was this? I mean, is it better to just pretend, or is it better to be honest about where this came from?
In my situation, it was always better to be transparent. Yeah. So I would always say, hey, I talked with engineering and this is what they told me. That way they knew that I was the messenger and not the one that was the subject matter expert per se.
And I think that gives a little more authority, saying, hey, I don't know the answer to this. Let me go talk to engineering, and then saying, okay, I talked to engineering and here's the answer. Yeah. And it really, I think it reinforces and builds a better relationship between you and that one, maybe everyone, because you're going, in some ways, going beyond assistance and like actually going to engineering and finding out the hard answers and stuff like that.
Yeah, it shows that you didn't just say, I don't know. You said, hey, let me actually do some legwork and go talk to the subject matter expert. Let me go do some research
and talk to, yeah.
What do you think, David?
Yeah, I definitely, I definitely agree with like responding sooner than later with a response. It's like, I don't know the answer, but I will find out. The faster that you can respond to someone and give them some assurance that some acknowledgement that their question is important or their issue is important. But I believe that for sure. As far as like the response goes, how it's framed, I don't know that it's, I'm super important to like, here's what the engineer told me, or just saying, here's what I found out. Or here's the answer. I mean, I feel like when I learn it, I now know the answer, and I can speak in first person on here's the fix. I don't know that I have to say, here's what the engineering told me. It's like, here's the answer. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, it's
I can see as an extension of, David, where you're coming from. Part of what we have to be careful about is that we're not just messengers, right? As developer advocates, we don't want to lose our own credibility. And so, if the engineer sends me a response and we may do a little back and forth to say, okay, wait, so does that mean, and does this imply, and what about X? To David's point, now I'm learning it so that I can say, this is what, I figured this out. And I have in the past. Scott did exactly what you said. Hey, I researched this. This is what the engineering team told me, or this is what I found out. But then in some cases, maybe add a coda to that to say, in addition, I also figured this out, right? And maybe here's a GitHub sample that shows that, because that also sort of reinforces, by the way, I'm an engineer too. I actually write code, right?
Right. And I've also done that, right? Like I've been in situations where it's like, hey, I talked to engineering or hey, I worked on it myself and I created this sample. And by the way, I threw it by engineering and they concurred that this was also correct, kind of thing. But like I also figured out the issue and then here's the code and everything. And so definitely see the advantage of going all three of those directions.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, in the last 30 minutes, you have basically all proven me right, which I greatly appreciate, that forums are in fact a still valuable thing for us to think. To be fair, and I think this was part of the conversation before we hit the record button, they're changing. They're definitely evolving, and we didn't even begin to talk about how agents, how they might influence where the forums go, and not just in terms of reaping, but also reaching back in. I mean, it is possible, particularly if we start seeing the rise of personal agents, right? The OpenCloud and so forth, where people are posting back to forums, but it's the agent posting on their behalf. Possibly. I don't know. I don't know where this goes.
Yeah.
But overall, I think they still serve as a useful tool in the DevRel team's toolbox. They just may not look like what we grew up with, depending upon whether you grew up with, PHP bulletin board or Usenet or the local wall of your post office as your bulletin board.
Dial up BBS right here.
There you go. There you go.
Well, do you remember the well?
The well? No, I don't remember this at all.
No.
Oh, so the well was a bulletin board in San Francisco. It was like the first. I think it might be the first bulletin board. It was like from the early 80s. So
wow.
Yeah, Kevin Kelly. You remember Kevin Kelly? He was the one of the original editors of Wired magazine, and he worked on the team that did the whole world. It was like a book, a physical book back in the day, but yeah, it was called The Well, and I always wanted to dial up to it. I had a modem, I don't think it was 14.4. It was even slower than that.
9600 or 1400.
It might have been a 9600, but and I always wanted to see if I could log into the well. But I didn't want to get in trouble with my mom for calling long distance.
Oh yeah, trust me, as one who racked up long distance charges.
Yeah,
those add up fast. Well,
they do.
Woody has now established himself as the old guy on the podcast, and
maybe.
On that note, I think we're going to sign off here, ladies and gentlemen. As always, if you like our content, be sure to mash that subscribe button. And or send us your feedback. Tell us what you like, what you don't like. Tell us all the ways you think Ted is wrong. Look for future episodes. We're going to continue to go through multiple patterns, as well as we're starting to send our feelers out and get some guests, which we will leave nameless for now so that we can surprise you. Pizzazz, excitement. But for now, thanks for listening, and we will see you next time in the Developer Relations Activity Podcast.